Samantha, for her part, was still trying to make sense of the relationship. She had never imagined herself with someone so understated, so different from the flashy men she had dated in the past. Her previous relationships had been driven by the pursuit of luxury, status, and excitement. She had always gravitated toward men who could give her the life she had dreamed of: fast cars, lavish vacations, designer clothing. But with Jimmy, there was no rush, no grand gestures, and no showy displays of wealth. And while that initially left her feeling unsettled, it soon became clear that there was more to this relationship than what appeared on the surface. They spent weekends together, often taking long walks through quiet parks, having casual dinners at local restaurants, or simply enjoying each other's company in silence. Jimmy never seemed rushed, and his attention to detail, his ability to listen, to engage, and to understand, became something that Anita found herself craving more and more. It wasn't the kind of attention that came with grand declarations or expensive gifts. It was the kind of attention that came with quiet moments, shared laughter, and thoughtful words. But it wasn't just Jimmy's gentleness that pulled Anita in, it was also the way he made her feel about herself. He didn't judge her for her past, her desires, or her ambition. Jimmy didn't care about the clothes she wore or the things she had, he cared about who she was beneath it all. It was a feeling Anita wasn't used to. She had spent so much of her life chasing validation from others, seeking approval in the form of material possessions or admiration, but with Jimmy, it was different. He saw her. He saw the parts of her that she often kept hidden, the insecurities, the dreams, the fears, and he accepted her without question. As they continued to spend more time together, Anita found herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had always been guarded, keeping her thoughts and emotions to herself, afraid of being vulnerable. But with Jimmy, there was no need for walls. He made it easy to be herself, even in the moments when she felt uncertain or unsure. Their conversations were effortless, full of light-hearted banter and meaningful exchanges. They talked about everything: her childhood dreams of becoming a successful entrepreneur, her fears of not measuring up to others, and her hopes for a future that was still uncertain. Jimmy, in turn, shared his own world with her, though he kept the details of his business life close to the vest. He spoke of the early days of his jewelry empire, of the struggles he had faced after his father's death, and how he had built the business from the ground up. But while he was open about his past, there were still parts of him that remained hidden. Anita had picked up on this, of course. She noticed the way his eyes would sometimes harden when certain topics came up, especially anything related to his wealth or the business world. She had always assumed that wealth came with its own set of challenges, but she hadn't fully understood the weight it carried until she saw the quiet strain in his expression at times. It was during one of their quiet dinners at a small bistro that Anita finally gathered the courage to ask Jimmy about his life. They were sitting across from each other, sipping wine, the soft glow of the restaurant's ambient lighting casting a warm glow on their faces. The restaurant was intimate, and the gentle hum of conversation around them made it feel like the world outside had faded away. Anita had been thinking about Jimmy's world for a while now. She wanted to know more about the life he had built and the man he was beneath the surface. "Jimmy," she began, her voice tentative. "I've been thinking a lot about your world lately." Jimmy raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a small smile. "My world?" "Yeah. Your business. Your jewelry empire," Anita said, pausing for a moment. "You've built something amazing, and yet, sometimes it feels like you're holding back. I don't understand why you don't talk about it more. You're so humble." Jimmy looked at her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. He set his wine glass down slowly, his fingers lingering on the rim as he seemed to contemplate his response. After a few moments of silence, he finally spoke. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't talk about it much. Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because it's a part of me that I've kept separate. I've spent my life building something that I'm proud of, but I don't want it to define me. People see the success, the wealth, and they think they know me. But it's not about that. It's about the artistry, the passion that goes into every piece I create. It's about what I give to the world, not what I take from it." Anita listened intently, her heart swelling with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. She had always assumed that Jimmy's wealth was just a byproduct of his success, something he used to measure his worth. But now she saw that his perspective was different. To him, his success wasn't just about numbers or profits, it was about creating something meaningful, something that left a lasting impact. "I've always believed that success is about more than just money or fame," Jimmy continued. "It's about creating something that outlives you. Something that touches people's lives in ways you might never fully understand." Anita was silent for a moment, processing his words. It was clear that Jimmy had a depth of understanding that went far beyond the material world she had once so eagerly chased. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She began to see Jimmy not just as the man who could give her a life of luxury, but as someone who could help her understand what true success really meant. The more Anita got to know Jimmy, the more she realized that there was so much about him that she didn't understand. His quiet strength, his unassuming nature, and his refusal to let his wealth define him were qualities that fascinated her. She had always thought that love, success, and happiness were tied to the external, the things you could touch, the things you could buy. But with Jimmy, she was starting to see that true fulfillment came from within, from the connections you made, and from the way you chose to live your life. Despite the growing connection between them, Anita still had her doubts. She was used to a world where material wealth and external validation were the markers of success. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of those beliefs. But as the weeks passed, she began to realize that what she had with Jimmy was different from anything she had ever experienced before. He wasn't like the men she had dated in the past, men who cared more about impressing her with their wealth than getting to know her as a person. Jimmy didn't need to impress her. He simply needed to be himself, and that was more than enough. One afternoon, as they walked through a park hand in hand, Anita looked up at Jimmy and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. There were still questions in her mind, uncertainties about where this relationship would lead, but in that moment, she realized something important. Jimmy had given her more than just a glimpse into his world, he had shown her a way of living, a way of loving, that was deeper and more meaningful than anything she had ever imagined. It was then that she made a silent promise to herself: she would try to let go of her old ideas of love and success. She would open her heart to Jimmy's world and embrace the simplicity and authenticity that he offered. And maybe, just maybe, she would learn to love not for the things he could give her, but for the man he was. As the days turned into weeks and their relationship deepened, Anita began to realize that she was falling in love with Jimmy, not because of the things he could give her, but because of who he was. His quiet strength, his humility, and his strong belief in the power of love and art were the things that truly captured her heart. And in that realization, she knew that her life, and her understanding of love, would never be the same again. It was a quiet evening when the phone call came. Anita and Jimmy were seated at their usual spot in the cozy restaurant they frequented. Jimmy's phone buzzed on the table. Anita noticed an immediate change in his demeanor. His eyes flickered to the screen, and she saw his jaw tighten for a brief moment. "Sorry, I need to take this," Jimmy said, his voice calm but with a hint of urgency. Anita nodded, offering a reassuring smile, but inside, she felt a strange unease settle in her chest. Jimmy was always so composed, so in control, that seeing him momentarily unsettled sent an unfamiliar ripple through her. As he stood and walked to the back of the restaurant, she watched him, her curiosity piqued. The conversation seemed brief, but the tension was unmistakable. Jimmy's body language shifted, and when he returned to the table, his usual calm was replaced with a more serious expression. "Everything okay?" Anita asked, trying to mask her concern behind a playful tone. Jimmy nodded slowly, but his eyes betrayed him. "Yeah. Just some business," he said, his voice distant. "I think we need to wrap up here, though. There's something I need to take care of." Anita was no fool. She could tell when something was off, and in that moment, the night didn't feel quite so ordinary anymore. She had learned over the past few months that Jimmy was a man of few words, but those words were always carefully chosen. It wasn't like him to be so vague, especially after what had seemed like a good evening. "Is everything okay with the business?" Anita asked, her brow furrowing with concern. Jimmy hesitated, then gave a small, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's nothing you need to worry about. It's just a few things to sort out." Anita didn't push further. She trusted Jimmy, and if he said it was nothing to worry about, she would take him at his word. But the nagging feeling in her stomach only grew as the night wore on. As they walked out of the restaurant, Jimmy's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, his face instantly hardening. "Go on home. I need to handle something," he said, his voice now laced with something Anita couldn't quite place, urgency, perhaps, or even worry. She hesitated for a moment, reluctant to let him go, but she understood. Jimmy had his life, his responsibilities, and she knew better than to hold him back from them. "Okay," she said, her voice softer now. "Be careful." "I will," he replied, the words edged with finality. That night, as Anita made her way back to her apartment, her mind raced. She tried to focus on the evening, on the simple joy of their dinner together, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Jimmy's phone call, his distant behavior, it all seemed too sudden, too serious. She had seen that look in his eyes before, the one that meant something was off, but it had never been directed at her. She wanted to trust him, to believe that whatever it was, it would be okay. But deep down, she felt a growing unease that she couldn't ignore. The following day, Jimmy's behavior remained unsettlingly distant. He was consumed by something, his mind clearly elsewhere, and it wasn't just because of his business. Anita didn't ask about the phone call, she respected his need for privacy, but the more she saw of him, the more she realized that whatever was happening was bigger than he was letting on. She had never seen Jimmy like this before. He was always the composed, thoughtful man she had come to know, but now he seemed distracted, distant, and, dare she say it, troubled. It wasn't like him to keep things from her, and though she didn't want to pry, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than he was letting on. It was late in the evening when Jimmy finally came to her. He walked through her front door, his face drawn and tired, his eyes tired but sharp. Anita stood from the couch, her stomach tightening as she met his gaze. "You're not telling me something, are you?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jimmy took a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted, like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. "I didn't want to get you involved in this. It's not something you need to worry about, but now. I think it's time you knew." He paused, as though gathering his thoughts. Anita stood in front of him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Last night," Jimmy began, his voice steady but low, "there was a robbery. A heist, actually. The diamonds were stolen, some of the rarest stones in my collection. And they're trying to blame me for it." Anita's heart skipped a beat. Blame you? How can they blame you? Jimmy exhaled slowly, his expression hardening. Because I'm the owner. The face of the company. And they're trying to say I had something to do with it. I don't know who's behind this, but I know they're using my name to cover their tracks. Anita stared at him, her mind spinning. Who would do something like that? I don't know, Jimmy said, his eyes darkening. But it's not just a business problem anymore. It's personal. And they're not going to stop until they get what they want. She could see the fear in his eyes, though he tried to mask it with a confident facade. She had always admired Jimmy for his calm composure, but now, she could see the cracks in his armor. This was no longer just a business issue for him, it was something much bigger, much darker. The heist wasn't just about stolen diamonds. It was about power, control, and the dangerous world that Jimmy had always kept hidden from her. This was the part of his life that he had never shared, the side of him that dealt with criminals, with danger, with risks far beyond the world of luxury and art that Anita had come to know. What can we do? Anita asked, her voice trembling. She had always thought of Jimmy as invincible, untouchable, but now she realized how much danger he was truly in. Jimmy looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. I'm going to handle it. I have to. I can't let this ruin everything I've worked for. Samantha felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. She had always seen Jimmy as a rock, steady, unshakable, but now, she saw the vulnerability in him. The thought that he was in danger, that his empire could be crumbling around him, was more than she could bear. Please, be careful, she said, her voice small but filled with concern. Jimmy nodded, his gaze softening for a moment. I will. But I need you to trust me, Anita. I need you to stay safe. Stay out of this. It's not your fight. Anita couldn't promise that. Not when it involved him. She had already seen the lengths to which Jimmy was willing to go to protect the things he cared about. But now, she realized that she cared about him in a way she never had before. And she couldn't stand the thought of losing him. As the days went on, Jimmy became increasingly consumed by the heist. He was no longer the man she had known, calm, collected, and always in control. Now, he was haunted by the very thing he had spent his life building. Anita knew that there was more to this than just the stolen diamonds. There were dark forces at play, and she was just beginning to realize how dangerous Jimmy's world truly was. And as much as she wanted to stay out of it, she knew that she would never be able to do so. This was his fight, and now, it was hers too. The days following Jimmy's revelation about the heist were a blur for Anita. At first, she tried to keep her distance, respecting his wishes to handle things on his own. He had always been so self-sufficient, and she had trusted him when he said it was too dangerous for her to get involved. But the more she saw him retreat into himself, the more the feeling of unease gripped her. Jimmy was a man who prided himself on control, and seeing him lose it, bit by bit, was something she couldn't ignore. It was late one evening when Jimmy finally reached out to her, asking her to meet him at his office. The gravity in his voice was unmistakable, and Anita knew that whatever he had been dealing with had only escalated. She didn't hesitate for a moment. She rushed to the office, her mind racing with every possible scenario. What could be so important that he needed to meet in person? And why had he been so distant over the past few days? When she arrived at his office, the atmosphere felt thick with tension. The lights in the lobby were dimmed, casting long shadows against the walls. The receptionist, usually a cheerful woman, gave Anita a sympathetic glance as she entered, as if she too knew something had changed in the world of Jimmy business. As Anita made her way to the elevator, her heart pounded in her chest. What had happened in the hours since their last conversation? When she reached the top floor, Jimmy's office door was slightly ajar. She knocked gently before stepping inside. Jimmy was sitting behind his desk, his face drawn and weary. His usual immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie was loosened, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up. There was a stack of files in front of him, but they appeared untouched. He looked up at her, his eyes heavy with the weight of whatever he was carrying. "Anita," he said, his voice low. "I'm glad you came. I need to talk to you about something. It's not easy to say, but I can't keep it from you any longer." Anita's heart sank as she crossed the room to sit across from him. His words, though calm, carried a depth of worry that she hadn't heard in his voice before. "What's going on, Jim? You're scaring me." He leaned forward, pressing his palms into the desk as though the weight of the conversation was physically exhausting him. "The situation's worse than I thought. There's someone behind this heist. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing and who's pulling the strings. And now," he paused, taking a deep breath, clearly struggling with what to say next. "Now what?" Anita asked, her voice barely a whisper. She had never seen Jimmy so vulnerable, so exposed. It was as though everything he had worked so hard to build was coming apart before his very eyes. "The people behind this aren't just after my company. They're coming for me. They're targeting everything I care about, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Anita's stomach twisted. "Anita, what are you saying? Who are these people? And what do they want from you?" Jimmy finally looked up at her, his expression grave. "They want control. Not just over my business, but over me. I've made enemies in this industry, Anita. Not everyone is happy with the way I've run things. I've stepped on toes. I've taken risks. And now, those people are coming for me, and they'll do whatever it takes to destroy me." Anita felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean, destroy you?" "I mean they're going to take everything," Jimmy said, his voice tight with emotion. "They've already stolen the diamonds, but that's just the beginning. They've got a plan to ruin my reputation, ruin my name, and destroy the business I've worked my whole life to build. They know exactly where to strike." Anita's mind raced. She had known that Jimmy's business was worth a lot of money, but she hadn't realized the full scope of what he had built, or how dangerous it had made him. It was becoming clearer now that Jimmy's world was not just about jewels and wealth. It was about power, influence, and a game of shadows that most people would never understand. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. Jimmy's eyes darkened, and he looked away for a moment. "I don't know exactly. But I have a suspicion. There's a rival company, one that's been trying to take me down for years. They've been making shady deals, trying to undermine my work, and I've been holding my ground. But now, they've crossed the line." Anita felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that there were people out there, actively plotting to destroy Jimmy's life, was something she couldn't wrap her mind around. She had always known Jimmy was successful, but this was something else entirely. "And the heist?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How does that fit in?" Jimmy's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of fear in them. The heist wasn't just a random act of theft. It was planned. Someone inside my company fed them information, tipped them off. They knew exactly where to strike, what to take, and how to get away without leaving a trace. Anita's heart sank. "You mean there's someone in your own company working against you?" Jimmy nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. And that's what makes this so dangerous. I don't know who I can trust anymore. I've got employees, partners, people I've worked with for years, and now, I'm questioning all of them. Anita could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had always viewed Jimmy's life as one of luxury and success, but now she saw the darker side of it all. The backstabbing, the betrayal, the constant pressure to stay one step ahead of those who would do anything to tear him down. Jimmy wasn't just fighting to protect his business, he was fighting to survive in a world where loyalty was in short supply and enemies lurked in every corner. "Jimmy, what are you going to do?" Anita asked, her voice filled with concern. She could see the toll this was taking on him. He was unraveling, piece by piece, and she wasn't sure how much more he could take. "I don't know yet," he admitted, his voice raw with frustration. "But I'm not going down without a fight. I'm going to find out who's behind this, and I'm going to take them down. I'll protect my company, and I'll make sure they don't get away with what they've done." Anita could see the determination in his eyes, but she also saw the fear. Jimmy was a man who thrived on control, but in this situation, he was powerless. And that realization hit her harder than anything else. He wasn't invincible. He wasn't untouchable. He was human, and the world he had built was fragile. "I'll help you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that was creeping up inside her. "Whatever it takes. I'm not going to let you face this alone." Jimmy looked at her in surprise, as though her words had caught him off guard.